So Peavey in the 90s enters a new model of guitar. This is called the Accelerator. And there's a few different kind of iterations of the Accelerator. There's Accelerator Plus, Accelerator X, and there's an Accelerator Plus Bass. There's a few different ones that you'll encounter out in the world. This one's just the regular old Accelerator, which is a standard Strat style 3 pickup layout. And you can see that this pickup here is black, doesn't match the other two. That's because I swapped it out for a Seymour Duncan. I think it's a 59 Seymour Duncan humbucker in a single coil form factor. I did not like the bridge single coil at all on this amplifier. I wish I did, but the other two pickups, they sound perfectly fine. But this bridge one, I just hated the sound of it. So I said, you know what, let's make this a little more functional. So I wired in this humbucking pickup, and it upgrades the sound and the quality of this guitar immensely. The Accelerator Plus actually does have the rail style humbuckers in the bridge, and I think you can even get a HSH configuration. Again, there's a lot of these out there, so you may have a different experience with your Accelerator, but this one, just the regular 3 single coil version with that upgraded Seymour Duncan humbucker. These guitars are also available in ash, but I believe the painted ones, which are the majority of them, are alder. And again, that's a material of guitar building that gets painted very frequently, so nothing really too shocking there. We do have the bilaminate hard rock maple neck. Even in the 90s, they still stick with that design. And this particular neck has a little bit of flamage on it, which is kind of cool. The one thing that I haven't mentioned about all of these guitars is that they are bolt-on construction, and the majority of them are going to be 4-bolt. So just know that if I don't call it out specifically, it's just a 4-bolt design. This one has a fairly unique kind of cutaway here to give you better access to these upper frets, but it is a 4-bolt bolt-on neck, and we do have a tilt adjust little window here. This is common on all Peaveys to help tilt the neck forward or aft. So a nice guitar. This is more of a Fender scale length, kind of Strat-like in design. It is a 25.5-inch scale length. We do have 22 frets, also very similar to a Strat. And the Graflon nut in this particular guitar is black. I think most of them are white, but this one is black, kind of matches the black body. I think it's cool. This particular tremolo is called the Power 3 Trem, and it's a Peavey tremolo, Peavey developed, individual saddles, and just your trem arm goes in here and acts just like a Strat. It does have the same exact spring style tremolo as a Stratocaster as well. So it's not a one-to-one Strat because we also do have a tilt back on the neck. You don't ever see that on a Fender. That's cool. I believe it's a 9-degree tilt back, not quite as severe as a PRS or a Gibson, but it does eliminate the need for a string tree on the headstock. Speaking of the headstock, we have stock from the factory locking tuners. They're gold. All hardware on here is gold. So locking gold tuners, gold bridge, really nice. The last spec to call out is this Perloid pickguard. I don't believe it's the kind that off-gasses in a case, so you don't need to worry about it. It doesn't have the actual Perloid material that will ruin guitars, but the truss rod cover as well is also that Perloid material to match. So it's a pretty classy looking guitar. Small dots, inlays. I don't know, some people dislike that. I'm on the fence. I don't really care too much about the dots, but they're unique at least, and they're different, so that's kind of cool. So besides the swapped out humbucker, this is a 100% stock guitar, and it sounds like this. That's the humbucker, by the way. We are in the bridge pickup. Okay, since we have a humbucker, let's hear what this amp can really do in that dirty channel once again. That's more like it. This thing sounds 1,000 times better when you do have a humbucker or at least a more modern single coil that can handle that high gain sound. So that's a little taste of the Peavey Accelerator. Let's stay in Accelerator land and talk about the Accelerator Plus bass. This was one of the very first basses that I picked up made by Peavey, and I fell in love with it instantly. It's from the 90s, we're in the 90s, and it's from that era, the same era as that guitar, where things are starting to get a little heavier and players are starting to ask a little more of their gear because they're not just plunking around. This isn't just country stuff anymore. This is built for the sophisticated musician, and what we have here is example of that. This is a swamp ash body. And swamp ash, like I mentioned earlier, is usually a natural flavor in the colorway, but we have a sunburst version here, but you can see the nice swamp ash wood grain. So a nice premium feature. We also have our bilaminate hard rock maple neck. Yes, they even had it on the basses, the hard rock maple in the bilaminate version, but we have a Pau Ferro fretboard. This is probably the earliest use of Pau Ferro as a fretboard that I've ever seen. I know that Fender used it later on. I think Gibson used it in their kind of government wood series when the government raided them. But you just don't see Pau Ferro that much in the 90s. So they're trying to find alternatives for rosewood. And this is a big, thick, old fretboard on here. So they really went whole hog on it, kind of a slab board on that maple neck. I believe our inlays are acrylic, but they look like mother of pearl. They're just very nice and characterful. They have a nice dancing effect. We also have that same 8-degree tilt back on this headstock, so really nice feature that is pretty unique to this line of guitars and basses. This is a 34-inch scale length, so the full bass scale length. Just great feel. And our pickups are called the VFL Plus fully active pickups, and they do require an 18-volt preamp, which you can see there is a compartment back here for those two 9-volt batteries. Whenever you see an 18-volt preamp, that's what it means. Two 9 volts, 9 plus 9 equals 18. And it's not very common, but some of these just require a lot of extra power to produce the sounds that they do. And this is one of those basses that has the 18-volt preamp with active pickup. They kind of look like Bartolini style, but they do say Peavey, and I'm pretty sure Peavey made them. We do have the same black Graflon nut on the Accelerator Plus bass, and the other iteration that you may find of this bass is just the Accelerator, and the Plus indicates that you get the gold tuners, the swamp ash body, the tortoiseshell pickguard, and the 18-volt preamp. Otherwise, I believe the Accelerator bass is just a passive kind of 2 pickup style bass. But I love these tuners. They're just really nice. The gold is really classy, and it's just a great playing bass. So I don't have a Peavey bass amp to plug this into, but I will plug it into my Warwick Gnome 200-watt solid-state bass amp, which is plugged into this Rivera 2x12 cabinet. So we'll get some sounds out of this bass with that setup. I'm not much of a slap bass player, that's something I gotta practice, but as far as just setting down a groove, this thing works in so many more contexts than a regular P bass, it's crazy. The one issue I have with all active preamp circuits is that if you leave it plugged in, you're gonna kill your batteries, and it's a pain in the ass to get into this cavity right here. So keep that in mind. That's my biggest gripe with active basses. Otherwise, this thing just rocks. Just thick and chunky. So that's the Accelerator Plus bass, one of my absolute favorite basses to play.
Hey folks, here's Tanner from the future. I actually forgot to insert one single guitar into this entire menagerie here, and that is the Peavey Reactor. So let's talk about the Peavey Reactor in the 1990s. So this is Peavey's very first foray into an actual Fender. I don't know if they licensed the body style or what they did. Maybe they changed things ever so slightly in the horn, but this is pretty much a Telecaster. I think you can tell from looking at it. We have the Telecaster body shape, plus the very familiar Telecaster single coil pickup layout. You can tell the black one towards the bridge looks just like a Fender bridge tele pickup, and the neck pickup is a lipstick style, which is, again, very Fender-esque. We have the same control layout, the metal plate with the volume and tone knob and a three-way selector. So very familiar. Even the pickguard, I think, would probably fit. I never tried, but I think you could probably swap these pickguards and they'd be fine with a Fender. So in addition to the Reactor, we get another Fender style guitar kind of in earnest. This is the first time that Peavey releases these real Fender specific designs, and the Stratocaster is actually called the Predator under Peavey, and they were produced here in the USA. All of these are USA products in the 90s, and they were great guitars. You can find both the Reactor and the Predator on the used market for usually around $400 these days. Although I think people are getting sharp, getting wise to the fact that these are high-value guitars made in the US, no bullshit guitars that you can still get for under $1,000. So the Reactor and the Predator kind of come out, I think, in 93. I can't find too many other examples prior to 1993. And in fact, the Reactor that I owned, a candy apple red one, was a 1993. So maybe that's the very first year of the Reactor. Again, you can probably find some in 92, but I think this is when they go earnest into these Fender designs. And it makes sense. They're 4-bolt guitars. The Peavey guitars do kind of have some sort of resemblance to Fender guitars, more so than Gibson, I would say, if you had to make a call one way or the other. But these Fender-esque guitars are just great. They sound exactly as you would expect, and they really don't break the bank. So our user manual in this case actually gives us an actual body material. The Fender-esque body is made of solid poplar, and our neck is made of that hard rock maple, still the bilaminate design. And yeah, it's a rock solid guitar. We do have a maple fretboard in most cases. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a rosewood one out there somewhere, but I can't say that I remember seeing one. It does have a 12-inch radius. We haven't talked about that too much, but that's called out in the manual, so I'll reference it here. Being Fender-esque, it is a 25.5-inch scale length with 22 frets. No surprises there. Bolt-on construction. Our nut is the Graflon nut that we've been seeing on, and we will continue to see. I think Peavey probably leaned into this Graflon. I don't know if they developed it or not, but they certainly used it on a lot of guitars, and mostly because it works well. We also have enclosed tuning machines, which they're called, but that's just garbage. These tuners are the weak point of this guitar. They're the domed style that look like they would be made in China or somewhere else, but I think I don't know, maybe they sourced some crappy tuners at this time in the Peavey era, but if you know any more about that, let me know. These are not good tuners. Otherwise, we have a 3-position switch, 2 single coils, master volume tone. They do claim to be wax dipped pickups for resistance. I don't know if that's a good, bad, or indifferent thing. I know that a lot of the time when you wax a pickup, it kind of makes it so it's impossible to fix, even if that's an option down the road. But either way, these are supposedly waxed. I'll bet that does make them a little bit quieter. So I can't believe that I missed this guitar in my compendium here, but let's go ahead and listen to a tone sample from a previous video that I did on this exact guitar.
not talk about Peavey in the 90s without mentioning 5150 and Eddie Van Halen. So for the next portion, we're going to talk about this amp right over my left shoulder called the Peavey 5150. This is a true milestone in Peavey history. This is what put Peavey on the map in the 90s and well beyond into the 2000s. This is still the sound that a lot of metal guitarists are chasing. Whether they do it through an EVH version, which is a more modern version of this tone circuit, or through a clone, someone that really wanted to emulate this sound like a Rev amp. Again, it's down to the 5150, and it's just the standard and really the benchmark. It truly changed the sound of music, or heavy music, from that mid-90s period on. Starting with our guy, Eddie Van Halen. The 5150 is the brainchild amp of Eddie Van Halen, and the partnership between him and Peavey started back in 1990. They were trying to develop an amp based on his modded Marshall that was something that he could just walk into any old Guitar Center, pick up, and have the perfect amp for him without having to mod it. So it was designed by Eddie Van Halen in conjunction with James Brown, not the hardest working man in showbiz, but the amp designer James Brown, who worked for Peavey in the 90s. And James Brown is really renowned as one of those amp builders that just has the Midas touch. He designed a bunch of different tube amps for Peavey in the 80s as well, and this builds on those while taking information that Eddie brought to him and just makes an amp that's the perfect amplifier for the working musician, especially those who need a lot of gain. This amp was released way back in 1992, and they still make a version of it today, a couple different versions actually. It's under the name 6505 or 6505 Plus, depending on what version you're looking at. And we'll take a look at one of those later on, but we're still in the 90s, so this here is the 90s beast. Interestingly enough, Eddie Van Halen worked with Peavey a little bit later in 1996 to develop his perfect guitar, the Wolfgang. And it's just a beautiful guitar from Peavey that's a total departure from anything else that they've made up until that point, or anyone else for that matter. It's just a new style of guitar that it fits in the lineage of electric guitars. Obviously, it's not like a multi-scale, multi-string instrument. It's a 6-string standard scale guitar, but it just takes into account a lot of the comfort and playability things that Eddie had developed over the years. So in the mid-90s, Eddie was all Peavey. Who would have thought? This is a high gain amplifier, 120 watts. That's huge. That's just a massive amount of power, and I've never turned it up beyond, I'd say, 4 on the lead channel, and it's deafening with a 4x12. They also developed a straight cabinet and a slanted cabinet, both 4x12 varieties, so you could stack the slanted on the straight cabinet and have a full stack with the head on top. That was Eddie's main touring rig for many a year. Like I mentioned, James Brown was instrumental in designing this amplifier circuit, and he worked previously on the Butcher and the VTM series that Peavey produced prior to this amplifier in the mid to late 80s. And those are really great amplifiers. They're not quite as juicy as this one, but you can see there's a development, a progression from the VTM and Butcher series into the 5150. There was also a 60-watt 2x12 combo version of this amp built around the same time, I think 1994. So the head was developed, released in 92, and then a couple years later, we get that 2x12 combo. 60 watts in this amplifier is still plenty of sound, however. We do get a high gain input and a normal input, which is basically just a 6 dB pad if you want a little lower of a sound. I typically leave it in the high gain because why not? It's super fun. But we do have a lead channel and a rhythm channel, 2 separate channels that get their own tone and sound controls. So it's kind of a landmark amp in that regard. We have more control over the sound than pretty much ever. 2 other things that you'll see on this amp that kind of were developed even with the Encore 65, we have a presence on this amp, we have a presence, and we also have a resonance, which basically just shapes the sound differently based on your guitar. So the presence and resonance knobs do a lot to really achieve that sound. And the last thing that I want to mention about this amplifier is that, yeah, it was meant to stick on top of a couple 4x12 cabinets, but there was always the intention of having effects on a rack being able to be patched in. And Eddie and most guitar players of the 90s were using rack effects at this point. So you have a whole rack of reverb, tremolo, maybe a little boost or some delay, you name it. There's all kinds of effects that were being emulated on rack-mounted units, and you can patch that right into the back so that it takes that sound pretty clean and applies it to the power amp section, is how I believe it happens. So this amp is a high gain monster, but if we just plug into the rhythm channel, we have really usable clean tone. So if we plug right into the high gain input, yet we're still in the rhythm channel, then it's just a regular clean sound that you would expect out of any Peavey amp. Really nice clean. You can crank that rhythm, that pre-dial all the way up, and it stays clean all the way up until about 7 or 8 when it starts to break up. There's just too much gain on tap, even in the rhythm channel, for that to stay clean all the way up. But what I love about this amplifier is if you have a rhythm situation where you don't want it clean, you want a little tube screamer or something, a boost, a top end boost, then we have a button on here called crunch, and we press that button. It's just like engaging a tube screamer to my ears. I'm sure there's some wizardry in the circuit that's different, but that sounds like a boosted channel just using a tube screamer or like a blues driver, something like that. And it's very usable. With the humbucker, it just sounds absolutely awesome. It's not blowing the doors off of things, it's just a little bit of boost on that rhythm channel, which is our clean channel. However, we do have one of these guys. Just like on the Encore 65, we can engage that lead channel just by kicking in channel 1, and it sounds like this. That is a classic sound, and I'm really not pushing this amp too hard. I keep it on 3 and 3 as far as the post and pre-gain for the lead channel, and that's all the sound you need out of a 2x12 cab. The cabinet I'm using currently is this orange 2x12 with 2 Celestian creambacks, so a very kind of classic sound you can imagine out of these speakers, but it works really well with the Peavey metal sound. And you can get a lot rowdier than that, but I'm not a genty guy. I'm just a regular old guy who likes to play hard music every now and again, and that's fine for me. That's all that I need on tap. And one more piece of 90s gear that I have in my possession currently is the Peavey Unity 500 6-channel mixer. And this is an interesting piece of gear because I use it for my PA. And it's just a regular old 6-channel mixer with 48 volt phantom power on board. It's not a powered mixer otherwise, so you do need an amplifier to power your speakers, but you can plug in 6 lines directly in, whether they be XLR, balanced or unbalanced lines, or even a patch from a different source. You can patch it right into the PA and it sounds great. This is a really versatile piece of gear for having a really small form factor. Not too much else to say about it. I don't want to demo this piece of gear because it's kind of hard to do that, but otherwise I just wanted to bring this piece of gear up and show that it's part of my arsenal. It should also be mentioned that Peavey's really highly regarded for their PA, their public address system equipment, and this small mixer here is just shrunken down version of their 24 channel mixer, and that 24 channel Peavey mixer can be found on rigs all over the world. Touring bands all over the world use that, and it just provides rock solid PA performance.